when I try to speak my own dialect, people will like, can you speak normally? I'm not the young guy who can you take down easily. People in US that were writing down documents didn't even know the difference between like Rusyn, Russian. That's the same thing. So they were just writing, okay, you're Russian, okay, you're good. Next one.
Today we have a special guest who is an enthusiast in Rusyn language.
Доброго здоровлічка. Мене звати Мигаль. Людиня має більш знати Мигаль Кушницький. І пен споза того, що родився в селі Кушниця, ото є Закарпаття, Україна.
You might be surprised what is Rusyn language. I know Russian language, but what is Rusyn language? So can you explain us about this language, or what is it?
Right now, I'm talking about a particular group of dialects, which is located westwards of Carpathians. And this is actually quite a disputed topic, and some people claim it's the most Western dialect of Ukrainian, and some people claim it's quite distinct language based on grammatical and semantic differeces between neighboring dialects. But in fact, linguistics as a thing doesn't have any kind of tool or instruments or methodology to separate what is a dialect and what is a language. There are many different factors. How can we actually name this or that a language? So how do I see this? If you have a separate grammar, this easily can be called a separate language if speakers of that language think so. And who we are to reject that.
What is the situation on the ground? Do people still speak this language in their daily life?
Well, in most of places where people end up in the cities more than the villages.
Mm-hmm.
So this forced them to switch to the standard language a lot, which within the time replace their native dialect mostly. It's just the statistics. It's how it happens. It will still have some regional features, but it will be way closer to the standard language.
Mm-hmm.
But here in Transcarpathia, it's actually a unique place inside of Ukraine, because it's the only place in Ukraine where there are more people in villages than are in the cities.
Okay.
You know? So in general, people speak their dialects in a majority. But different thing is, they don't really have that much of awareness that this is a different language, because mostly because it was banned during the USSR times. Like during USSR times, you could not say it's Rusyn language. It was basically dangerous for you. Like I do remember in my childhood, so well, USSR were not existing anymore, right? But I do remember that at home, this word was never said out loud, only like Rusyn, Rusyn, po-nashemu. But you never could heard it like out loud. Although some different like Rusyn organizations sprang around here and there, and they were like trying to do some cultural activity, but mostly people just forgot about it. The government and the system of education were positioning it the way like, well, this is some kind of a weird dialect of Ukrainian that was influenced a lot by Hungarian. That's why you speak that way. Okay, I do agree at some point there was a huge influence of Hungarian language, but the majority of that influence happened in like 13th and 14th century.
Really? So a long time ago.
How we can call that a Ukrainian dialect in 13th century? no one even called themselves Ukrainian back then. It was just, the Rus just broke apart, and like there were many different things in that time, but there was no such thing as Ukraine as a country or Ukrainians as a nation at that moment. So those dialects were influenced by Hungarian language before we can legitimately call them Ukrainian.
So you mean now this dialect is still alive because many people live in the villages and they still speak it? Although
Yes.
maybe official schools are in Ukrainian and everything official documents, but in daily life, what about how do you I don't know, if you go to a shop, do you switch to standard language, or how does it work for people who live in a monolingual society? They might not know this, how you constantly change
It depends. If you live in a village, you should be ready that you will speak only that dialect. Like 99% of the time, you'll speak only that dialect. Like only place where I was speaking Ukrainian at home in my village, it was the school, surprisingly. Like I was not speaking Ukrainian besides of the school. So if you go to a store, to a local shop to buy something, you also speak a dialect in there. But there is a tricky moment. All the products are labeled in Ukrainian. So you basically mix two things at the same time because your own dialect is not prepared for some particular terms.
Yeah.
Like there is a word for oil.
How?
Olü.
Wow.
That's a word for oil in my dialect. So instead of saying Olia, which is expectable by standard Ukrainian, you'll say Olü. But at the same time, you will not have a different word. For example, for like maslo sounds the same. It's butter, but some particular things that are new will be referred in Ukrainian because like we didn't have our own word for that, and we'll just adopt a new word that came in. Like we don't have a new word for television, we also say televisor because it's a quite recent thing.
What about, so now you live in a city that is like the people speak standard Ukrainian. So when
Yes,
you go
mostly.
Yes, but when you go to a shop, do you try to speak your native dialect or you switch to standard Ukrainian?
Most of the time that I was living here, I used to speak standard Ukrainian only. But recent 2 years, I started to do some experiments. Like I had a lot of negative experience here. Like there were lots of cases when, I wasn't attacked or anything, but like I was quite offended by people's behavior sometimes. Like when I try to speak my own dialect, people will like, can you speak normally? And I'm like, that was the only normal way for me for years. Like since before I moved in. So right now, I'm not the young guy who can you take down easily. What do I do right now? So if I go to a store or I don't know, or a restaurant or a cafe, I'll speak Ukrainian standard by default. I'll greet them and so on and so on. I'll do a purchase. I'll say goodbye. But if that's not the first time I'm in that place, I'll try to speak to them in my dialect. And during recent 2 years, I did not had a single negative experience yet. Like people were reacting positively because it ended up that they are not from this city as well. They are like from nearby places, Hustyachiv, Mukachevo, Svalava, and so on and so on. And they will be even glad that I spoke to them that way because they miss it. They miss their own thing. They're like, wow, where are you from? Like, let's speak a bit more, let's chat and stuff, you know.
It's great.
They enjoy it, right?
So maybe it's we need more people who are not ashamed and they try to speak their language. Like
that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to point out that their own dialect or language is also good for communicating, you know. It's just in Ukraine there is like a difficult situation with all the varieties that are not standard, you know. If you are from the East and you speak a natural dialect of Ukrainian, you can be stigmatized as Surzhyk, which is not necessarily a Surzhyk. Like on the East, it's okay to say Horod instead of Misto when you speak of the city, because it was a local variety of the language. Like it was a thing. It was not adopted from Russian. It was natural way of languages evolution there. As well as it's okay to say konfeta instead of cukorka there on the East. So in my particular case, when I say boat instead of magazine, it's also okay because it's one of the words that was used here.
The most funny thing for me is when people argue. So as you say, in standard Russian, they say konfeta. In standard Ukrainian, we say cukierka. But both of these words, they are neither Russian nor Ukrainian. They are
not of the Slavic origin.
Yes, so they are taken from France, from German. So, but people fight over, oh, it's Ukrainian, Russian. No, it's French, German. But people, it's amazing.
The point is we adopt words from other languages all the time. It's a normal thing. It was happening before and it's happening right now. Like, do you know Ukrainian word for the internet?
No.
Internet.
Yeah,
well, that's the point. Like we actually can create a new word for it, but is there a reason to do so? That's disputed.
Yeah. And by the way, you have an amazing channel about this Rusyn dialect. And can you tell us about your activities, about your channel? What is your goal? And how successful it is?
Well, the point is because of this concept of stigma on all the dialects, on the languages, all the like local varieties that are not standard, people are kind of ashamed to speak their own language on the internet. Like if you try to record a video in the village, people will be, oh, let's speak standard. Доброго дня, я народився. Well, people will be in panic. They are afraid to show their own thing. So what am I trying to do? I've noticed that over the internet, there is very, very little information about Carpatho-Rusyn language as a thing. So it's either very political bullshit that I don't want to mess around with, or it's like a comedy. It's like making fun of people from the village, making fun of their way of speaking, you know? I don't like both of those. And I wanted to find something neutral, something that people can watch without feeling hate or without laughing. Just normal content, you know, just something that people can watch and say, hey, this is cool. And yeah, this is my thing. I speak this way, and this is okay. So I want to create an alternative niche for people to enjoy themselves.
And like, you teach this language, and who learns this language? Who is your audience? Who is interested or even want to learn?
Well, if we look at statistics, most of the people that watch my channel are not learners, but speakers. They actually do speak this language, and they are just interested in the content on this language. And people who are trying to learn it, well, those are a couple of categories. First category is like children of the city. I'll call them this way. Those are people who were born in the city, so they adopted standard Ukrainian mostly, but they do remember that their grandparents or grand-grandparents spoke this language, and they are kind of interested in it, and they want to like learn a bit more about it and stuff. So that was the first category. Second category, I call them like immigrants. Those are descendants of immigrants from this place. So there was a huge wave of migration in the beginning of 20th century. So there is a huge community of Rusyns in United States and in Canada. And their kids, grandkids and grandkids, they didn't really adopted the language that much, but they are trying to keep the culture alive. They do know who they are. They follow all the traditions and stuff, but they don't necessarily save the language itself, except of like a couple of words. So they are interested in their own heritage. They want to see what's happening here in the old homeland, you know. And the third category, those were the two first. And the third category is just language enthusiasts that are trying to learn something new, something rare. And in case of those category, those are people that already speak like 5-6 languages, and they just need something more.
Yeah, and it's, yeah, like me, I learned like many languages, and it's very interesting. But also it's very interesting that you mentioned diaspora in the United States. I think people like who are from Western Ukraine and who live like in the USA, their like great-grandparents came from Western Ukraine, and some of them like decide, oh, I want to study the language of my ancestors. But probably very often they study standard Ukrainian instead of your dialect, which is probably not the correct. So probably they would be better off learning like watching your channel to learn the real language of their ancestors. What do you think?
It depends where they come from, right? If they come from, let's say, if the ancestors of that person came from, let's say, Rivne, or I don't know, like Ivano-Frankivsk. So I would say that standard Ukrainian might be kind of closer, but not necessarily. So I don't know. It's not me to decide. But what I do know, so Rusyn thing was basically banned during the USSR times. And I hear a lot of stories from those people. Like there is one funny Lemko guy. He actually has a great, like awesome Lemko language lessons on YouTube here. I'm gonna drop you a link. You'll enjoy that. So he told me that at home, his family, they were speaking English, Polish, Ukrainian, and Lemko. And he pointed out those two as separate things. Right. So at the age of like 15 or 16, he decided to like learned the language of the ancestors, right? So he started to learn Ukrainian standard because it was accessible. Like it was easy to find back then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they, with the family, came back home to Poland to meet their like relatives. They have some relatives in Poland, Lemkos. They came here, and he told me he started to speak Ukrainian standard to those to his relatives, and they were like, they didn't understand him, you know, like, at that moment, his mother like realized the thing, and she told him like, oh, like that's okay. It's just they don't speak Ukrainian. They speak Lemko. You'll get along. You'll understand that later. Like,
yeah, it's amazing.
yeah, and some other guy was also telling me like my parents thought that they are like some special kind of Russians because that's the way they were written down in documents when they came to the US.
Mm-hmm.
But it ended up that they are not Russians, they are Rusyn. So it was just, well, basically people in US that were writing down documents didn't even know the difference between like Rusyn, Russian, that's the same thing. So they were just writing, okay, you're Russian, okay, you're good. Next one, like.
Yeah. So the takeaway, if you are from the US or a Western country and your family or ancestors from Ukraine, so you should maybe a little bit research where exactly they came from, what part of
Yes, correct. You should do some kind of research where they are from to realize what your ancestor life is.
Yeah.
And
yeah. What about now, as for example, if I'm a language enthusiast, as you said, and I all of a sudden decide to learn this Rusyn language, and I go to your region and start talking to people probably would be really like surprised, or even they might think I'm joking because nobody learns this language.
well, yeah, it's also the result of the stigma, you know. People will not get you seriously from the first attempt. Like, yeah, they might think that you're just making fun of them, which is not necessarily a thing, of course. But like, for example, I know a guy, he's a DJ, and he came here to Uzhhorod at 2013, I guess. So, okay, first 2 years, he was not living here in Uzhhorod. He used to live in a small village nearby. So eventually he adopted the Rusyn dialect from his neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so shocked, like I was so impressed by this because like I've never seen this vice versa, you know. It's easy to see a person from the village that speaks like, I don't know, standard Ukrainian. But I've never seen a person who didn't grow up here, but adopted the language afterwards. Like I was, wow.
Yes, so this example, they exist, so it's possible.
I will eventually do an interview with that guy. So you're probably gonna see him on YouTube as well.
People who speak this dialect or language live in the Western Ukraine. So what is the most similar language to Rusyn? Is it like Ukrainian or Russian or maybe other language? What is the closest?
Well, some people claim it might look like Russian because of the writings. Like look.
Oh, okay.
Like you see this letter? Yeah. Well, when people see me writing this letter, they're like, oh, this is Russian letter and stuff, but it's actually not. I mean, yes, this letter exists in Russian language, but Russian language is not the language that invented this letter, you know, like this letter itself existed in the early Slavic alphabet, in Cyrillic alphabet, before Russian language as a thing exists, you know. Mm-hmm. And right now it's also being used in other Slavic languages like Belarus. Do you know that? And they also have this letter, and like no one claims it's Russian, you know. And plus, this letter was also used by Ukrainian writers some time ago as well. Like it was used here by all the political directions before the 1938. Like everyone was writing it down because it has its purpose. Like it has a separate sound for it that is distinct from the A sound. So there is A and
Yeah, so also that it is called Rusyn, which is for some people sounds also like Russian, but it's a pure coincidence. Like maybe something like Slovenian, Slovakian doesn't mean it's the same language.
The main reason why that happened, these people used to live in Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they used to follow the Eastern Rite. I mean, the Eastern Church. So it was either Orthodox or Greek Catholic, mostly Greek Catholic. So, and Hungarians were using a Latin term, Rutan, to refer to those people, because also Latin language was an administrative language of that empire. So they were just called them all Rutan. And local people actually they did stick to their religion way more than to ethnicity. In fact, before the 19th century, the religion you follow was way more important than your ethnicity. So people used to say "Мы русский," but they were not meaning we are Russian. During that time, it was a word to refer to all the Orthodox or all the Greek Catholic people, because basically it was a church of Eastern Rite.
Yeah, okay. But right now, so as people who might not know, in Ukraine we have Ukrainian language and many people speak Russian. And if you go to Western part, so the language people talk sounds more like Polish or Slovak. So for example, we live in central Ukraine, and for us, it sounds more closer to Polish or Slovak. So maybe you can explain in that term. So is it closer to Western languages, Slavic languages?
Well, dividing those languages into Western or Eastern is not that crucial, actually. The point is, Ukraine is quite big as a country, and you have plenty of different dialects which undergone different historical events, you know. All of that were influencing them at some point. Plus, every dialect will have its own kind of phonetical or other linguistic evolution. So if you have, let's say you have some closed dialect which is hidden somewhere in mountains, and it's not being affected by any other dialect, by any other language, but it will have some changes over the centuries. It will have its own natural evolution. So what do we know? There are plenty of different dialects, and they are all evolving. So in Ukraine, if you go from the border to the border, you will notice that all the people in villages will speak slightly different from village to village. And if let's say there are no borders, let's say there are no borders at all, and you just can go wherever you want, and you go westwards, and you will go from village to village, and you will notice that every next village, some particular words will be spelled differently, or some particular words will just disappear and other words will came up, and so on. But you will not spot the point where Ukrainian language ends and Polish language starts. There will be no such separation. Mainly because Slavic languages are quite close to each other, and this separation is more or less a political thing. So right now, what we call Ukrainian language is based basically on the country we call Ukraine, because there were two quite distinct literal traditions: Eastern Ukrainian and Western Ruska mova. And in the beginning of 20th century, they basically fused into one into one standard language, which took mostly Eastern grammar and like some Western features. And they are not that well balanced as we might think. Like, for example, we have a word mad, like honey. For honey, we have mad, but we have the word lead for ice. And they were having basically the same kind of evolution from pra-Slavic. So it was supposed to be either lad and mad or mead and lead, but they are different for some reason. This is the result of this fusion, you know, like I have an advice for everyone that is interested in Carpatho-Rusyn. There is a couple of different moments. So there are a couple of standard variations of the language. So there is Pannonian Rusyn, which is codified in Serbia, Vojvodina. They have codified language and education and so on since 1923, I guess, so almost 100 of years. Second codification is in Slovakia. They have Prešov standard. So they also have a codified version of the language, which is a bit different. Well, I would say quite different from the Pannonian one. And there is also a Lemko standard in Poland, which is quite similar to the Slovakian one. And the only country that doesn't have any codification yet is Ukraine, actually. Wow. So if you want to learn, a Carpatho-Rusyn language that is common here in Transcarpathia, it will not be that easy as with those three options, because there is no like one standard way. There are four major dialects, well, at least four major dialects, and there is no single standard variation. But I have a list of resources that will help you to get along with the language anyways, and I'll send it to you, and you can like mention it somewhere in the description. I don't know. It might be useful for people.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting. I hope people liked it. I really like this conversation. So thank you for talking and explaining everything. And everybody can check out your channel and get acquainted with.
I would be happy to help.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.